Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm Fiona Umpa with Alfie Data Analytics. In this video, I'll walk you through creating this Personal Finance Semantic Model. So this video is the first part of a two-part series. The second part will be looking at the visualization stage. So stay tuned for that. I'll release the video for that soon. So let's get started. Okay, so before we start, I'd like to just remind you once again about the Power BI workflow. So we'll be focusing on Power BI Desktop in this video. So we'll get the data, you will transform the data using Power Query Editor. Then in the model stage, we'll apply the star schema modeling technique. Moving on to the calculate stage, we'll apply DEX to create our measures and our calculated columns. So DEX is data analysis expression. Firstly, let's understand the test data set that we'll be working with. So here we have someone's financial records between 2023 and 2024. The transactions type includes the expenses and the income. Okay, for each transaction type we have a category. We also have the payment method and the amount, which is a negative value for the transaction type expense. Okay, so start up Power BI Desktop on your computer and click on Transform Data. So once we have Power Query open, we're going to go to New Source and select Text to CSV because our source file is a CSV file. Okay, navigate to where you have your file saved on your computer, select it, and let's load that into Power Query. The next step is to apply the star schema modeling technique. So we have to identify our fact and dimension tables. So if you don't know what the star schema is, I explained all that in my video, in a previous video. So I'll put the link below. So let's start off with the fact table. So we know that the fact table contains the quantitative data or the measures, which are the focus of our analysis. So directly, looking at this data, we can say that this is our fact table, which contains the amount column, which we can analyze by the transaction type, the category, and the payment method. Okay, so once we've identified the fact table, now let's move on and identify our dimension tables. So our dimension tables are the descriptive attributes about the measures. So looking at our data set here, the descriptive attributes about our measure, which is amount, are the transaction type, the category, payment method, and the date. Okay, firstly, let's set up the date dimension. So I'll copy and paste the M code to generate our date dimension. Okay, let's quickly do that. I will just quickly change the date period here to 2024 because our date range is the data we have is for 2023 and 2024. Maybe we can just put it directly at 2023 to 2024. Okay, let's also rename our date dimension to dim date. Okay, to rename, you either right click on the query and rename, or you double click directly on the query. Okay, so next up, we'd also like to extract the transaction type, the category, and the payment method. So right click on the original query and select reference. So what reference will do is that when there's updates to the original file, the updates will be replicated as well to the copies or to the reference that you made. But with the duplicate option, if ever you select that, any updates to the original file won't be updated to the duplicates as well. Okay, so go on and select reference. Okay, so once that's done, we want to extract the transaction type. So we're going to select the column transaction type, right click on it, and then we will remove other columns. Okay, once we have that, we're going to go on and remove the duplicates. Okay, now let's rename that to dim transaction type. And let's repeat the same process to the category and payment as well. Okay, so now that completes all our dimension and fact tables. Next up, I'd like to also create groups, so we'll organize all these queries together. So let's create, so right click on the blank space there and select new group. So new group, basically it will create like a folder for us to organize the queries. So let me just select, rename that to source. So let's put our source query there. Next group, let's create the model. Let's organize our dimensions tables into that model. Okay, there's one more thing we'll do, and that's for the fact table. So I usually like to leave the source query as is, so we'll do a reference of the fact table as well. So it's basically the same data, but we'll just rename that to fact personal finance. Okay, so now once that's done, the next step is for us to just quickly have a look at all our queries and ensure that the data type is correct. So just quickly glance through all the data queries. For the year, I'm going to change that to a text data type. We'll leave all the other columns as is. The transaction type, that's fine. The category, that's fine. And the payment method. Okay, so next up we're going to load all this data into the main Power BI report, but we don't want to load this personal finance record because that's our source file, right? So what we'll do to not load this, we'll right click on it and we've got the option enable load. So what it basically does is that we'll include it in the report refresh, meaning Power Query will reconnect to the source file to load in new data when we refresh the file or refresh the data set, but it won't load this query into our main Power BI report. So we'll uncheck that. Okay, so now we'll just load the dimension and the fact tables. So everything looks good. Let's click on close and apply. So once the data has been loaded, let's go directly to our model view. Okay, as you can see, we've only loaded our fact and dimension tables. So as usual, I like to put my fact tables below and my dimension tables on top. Okay, let's just organize that so we have a clean sort of layout. Okay, so you see that we've got our dim category, transaction and payment methods already connected, but we'll just, the relationship has already been done for us automatically. But let's just confirm that everything is all right. Yes. Category and transaction type and payment method. Okay. So next up, let's create a relationship between our dim date and our fact table. The date column on our dim dates and the date column on our fact table. So just drag and drop. Okay, so now we are done in the model view. Next up, let's create our measures and calculated columns using DAX or data analysis expression. So measures are calculations used for aggregating data dynamically, for example, total income, total expenses, while the calculated columns are static computations that add new data to the model. For example, if you want to add a new column to the dimension table. Okay, so the measures we'll be calculating in this report are total income, the total expenses, the available balance, and the total savings. As for the calculated column, we'll just be adding one column to the dim payment method. The column name will be payment method category. The values will be digital or physical. So for digital, that would be everything for the payment type credit card, debit card, or bank transfer. And for the physical payment method category, that would be cash. So that's what we're going to do next. Before we create our measures, I'd like to add an empty table to save our measures in, but you can also create the measures directly in the fact table. Okay, so let's click on enter data. Let's give that a name, key measures, and select load. Okay, so let's create our first measure, total income. So we'll just right click on our key measures table, select new measure. So I've already created this measure or prepared this measure, the calculation in another report. So I'll just copy and paste. So that's the first measure. Okay, so let's look at this measure in more detail. Okay, starting off with the sum function. So the sum function calculates the sum of all the entries in the amount column of the fact table. Okay, next up we've got the personal finance amount where it's greater than 0. Well, this is a filter condition that specifies only to include the rows where the amount is greater than 0. It effectively filters out all non-positive values, that is 0 or negative amounts, which are not considered as income. And finally, the calculate function. So this function changes the context in which the data is evaluated. So it takes the amount, the sum of the amount is defined by the first parameter, the sum function, but only for the rows that meet the conditions specified in the second parameter, where the amounts are greater than 0. Okay, before we create the other measures, let's just delete this column here. So that was the column that was created by default when we created the table. Okay, so notice that this table has changed from a normal table to a measures table by the icon. Okay, next up, let's create the total expenses measure. So I'll just copy and paste from the measure that I've already prepared, the calculation that I've already prepared. Let's look at this measure in more detail. So we have a similar calculation as we had in the total income, with a slight modification on the filter condition where the amount is less than 0 to identify only the expenses. We then have a new function here, the ABS or the absolute value function, where it converts the result into a positive value. Moving on, let's create the next measure, available balance. So right click, new measure. Just copy and paste the measure that I've already prepared. So in this measure, it's quite simple. We're just doing a sum, or we're just calculating a sum of the amount column. Why just the sum of the amount column? Because we have the income as positive values and the expenses as a negative value. Okay, so the final measure is total savings. So let's quickly create that. And as usual, I'll copy and paste. Okay, so let's look at this measure in more detail. So we have exactly the same sort of calculation as we had for the total expenses and the total income, right? This time for the savings, it's also identified as an expense. So the filter condition is for a negative value. In addition to this filter condition, we've also got a second filter condition here, and that's to identify the category as savings. Okay, so these are the two filter conditions that we are passing into this calculate function. And finally, we use the absolute value function to convert the result into a positive value. Okay, and finally, let's create the calculated column. So over to our payment method table, right click on it and select new column. And as usual, I'll copy and paste. Let's look at this DEX calculation in more detail. So here we have the switch function, which is primarily used for conditional logic. So the first condition checks if the value of the payment method is in the set credit card, debit card, or bank transfer. So if any of these metrics are true, switch returns digital. So this suggests that the payment methods are considered digital forms of payment. So the next condition checks if the payment method equals cash. So if this condition is met, meaning it's true, switch returns physical, indicating that cash is considered a physical form of payment. But if none of the specified conditions are met, switch defaults to returning other. So this is indicated by the final argument in the switch function, which serves as the fallback result for any payment method value not explicitly covered by the two earlier conditions. So this completes our video for today. So here we have the semantic model. Remember, the semantic model in Power BI consists of the model that you create in the model view by applying the star schema modeling technique. And in addition to that, you add your measures and your calculated columns. So in the next video, I'll be creating the visuals, or we'll go into the visualization part of this video. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got some value in this video. If so, please consider supporting the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.